The rain had been falling for days over the lush plateau of Shanxi province, turning the gray dust into a thick, clinging mud that swallowed boots and shovels alike. It was here, in the mid-1990s, that a group of local farmers, digging near the city of Gaopeng, struck something that made a sound not like stone, but like brittle porcelain. They scraped away the wet earth, expecting perhaps a shard of ancient pottery, a remnant of a forgotten kiln. Instead, they found a skull. Then another. Then a femurs, ribs, and jaws, compacted together in a layer so dense it looked like a geological stratum of death. These were not the carefully arranged remains of a royal tomb, nor the respectful interment of ancestors. These bodies were twisted, mouths agape and silent screams, limbs entangled in a chaotic struggle that had been frozen in the suffocating dark for over 2,200 years. The locals call this place the Ravine of the Dead, but history knows it as the aftermath of Changping. As an outsider standing on the edge of that pit, looking down into the tangled mass of what used to be an army, you were struck not by the glory of ancient China, but by a cold, paralyzing realization. You were looking at the site of a massacre so large, so clinically efficient, that it defies the modern comprehension of warfare. This is not a battle, it is an industrial disposal of human life. To understand how 400,000 men ended up buried beneath this soil, we must step back from the edge of the pit and look at the collision of two titans in the 3rd century BC. The Warring States period was drawing to a bloody close, and the rising power of Qin was locked in a death spiral with the state of Zhao. For years, they had been at a stalemate, a grinding war of attrition that bled the treasuries dry and left the fields fallow. The Zhao army was led by Lian Pa, a veteran general who understood that against the ferocious Qin war machine, the only victory lay in patience. He built walls, he dug trenches, and he waited, refusing to take the bait, refusing to fight on the enemy's terms. But in the capital city of Handan, the king of Zhao grew impatient. He listened to whispers, likely planted by Qin spies, that the old general was a coward, too senile to seize glory. And so, in a decision that would doom a generation, the king replaced the hardened veteran with a young man named Zhao Kuo. From a Western perspective, Zhao Kuo is a tragic archetype we recognize all too well, the armchair strategist, the theoretician who knows the price of everything but the value of nothing. He was the son of a famous general, a young man who had memorized every military text, who could debate tactics until his opponents were silenced, yet he had never smelled the copper scent of fresh blood on a battlefield. His own father had warned on his deathbed that his son treated war as a game, seeing soldiers as pawns rather than flesh and blood. When Zhao Kuo took command, he looked at the maps and saw opportunity where his predecessor saw danger. He ordered a full-scale attack, abandoning the defensive fortifications to march his massive army straight into the jaws of the Qin. What he did not know, what he could not see from his high horse, was that the Qin had secretly replaced their own commander with a man whose name was whispered in fear across the 7 states, Bai Qi. In the West, we speak of Hannibal and his trap at Cannae, but Bai Qi's maneuver at Changping was a masterclass in psychological and spatial warfare that predated Hannibal. Bai Qi feigned a retreat, drawing the arrogant young Zhao Kuo deeper into a valley, stretching his supply lines until they snapped. Then, like a steel trap slamming shut, Bai Qi unleashed 25,000 troops to cut off the Zhao rear, and another 5,000 cavalry to sever their communications. The Zhao army, 400,000 strong, was suddenly an island in a sea of enemies. For 46 days, the Zhao soldiers were trapped in that valley. The autumn winds turned to the biting frost of early winter. The food ran out. The water ran out. The desperation inside the encirclement is something that the dry historical texts hesitate to describe in full detail, but we know that eventually, the horses were eaten. And when the horses were gone, the men began to look at each other not as comrades, but as meat. Cannibalism, the final degradation of the human spirit, took hold in the starving camps. Finally, after a failed breakout attempt where the young theorist Zhao Kuo was cut down by Qin archers, the starving remnants of the Zhao army surrendered. They threw down their weapons, expecting, perhaps, the mercy of enslavement. But Bai Qi looked at this mass of humanity, nearly 500,000 starving, desperate men, and saw a threat. He reasoned that the people of Shandong were loyal to Zhao and would never truly submit to Qin rule. To release them was to arm future rebels. To keep them was a logistical impossibility. So, he issued a command that echoes through history with a chilling finality. He ordered them all to be executed. Deception was used one last time. The prisoners were likely told they were being moved or fed, herded into pits and ravines, and then the soil began to fall. The texts say only 240 of the youngest soldiers were spared and sent back to Zhao, not out of mercy, but to spread terror, to tell the weeping widows and mothers that an entire generation of men had been erased from the earth. Standing over those excavation sites today, seeing the fractured skulls and the chaotic layering of bones, you feel the weight of that silence. It is the silence of a state that never recovered, a demographic wound so deep it paved the way for the Qin unification of China. If the dust of Chongping represents the horror of land warfare, then we must travel south, centuries later, to the stifling humidity of the Red River Delta to witness a mastery of water that halted an empire that had conquered half the known world. By the late 13th century, the Mongol Yuan dynasty was an unstoppable juggernaut. They had burned Baghdad, crushed the Song dynasty, and swept across the steppes of Russia. Under Kublai Khan, they turned their gaze toward the tropical kingdoms of Southeast Asia. But here, in the dense mangroves and tidal rivers of Dai Viet, modern-day Vietnam, they encountered a different kind of enemy. Imagine the scene through the eyes of a Mongol soldier. You are used to the open plains, the thunder of cavalry charges, the clear sightlines of the steppe. They have driven these stakes deep into the mud of the estuary, creating a forest of underwater spears, invisible when the tide is high. It is April 9, 1288. The morning fog lifts to reveal the Mongol fleet moving downriver, desperate to reach the open sea. The tide is high, hiding the trap. Tran Hung Dao sends out a small flotilla of light, fast boats. They attack the massive Mongol warships, stinging them with arrows and fire, then feigning panic and retreating. It is the oldest trick in the book, yet the Mongol commander, Omar, takes the bait. He orders his heavy ships to pursue, eager to crush these insolent pests. The current is fast, the adrenaline is high, and the fleet rushes forward, past the point of no return. Then, the tide turns. This is the moment the Western mind struggles to visualize, the slow, inexorable shifting of the ocean itself, weaponized by a general who studied the moon as closely as he studied the sword. As the water level drops, the heavy Mongol ships begin to bottom out. But they do not hit soft mud. They hit the iron-tipped stakes. The sound must have been deafening, the cracking of timber, the screeching of metal on wood, the sudden lurching stops as ships impaled themselves on the riverbed. The fleet is paralyzed, trapped in a chaotic tangle of broken hulls. And then, the trap closes. From the banks, thousands of Vietnamese soldiers emerge from the reeds. Fire rafts are launched downstream, drifting into the immobilized wooden leviathans. The Mongol ships, packed with gunpowder and supplies, turn into floating infernos. Men who conquered the steppes are forced to jump into the churning water, where they are dragged down by their armor or picked off by archers. The river runs red. Admiral Omar is captured. The devastation is total. 400 warships are lost. It is a victory of intelligence over brute force, a reminder that in Asia, the land and the water are active participants in war, loyal only to those who know how to listen to them. While Tran Hung Dao used the invisible power of the tides, another general, centuries earlier during the Three Kingdoms period, used the highly visible power of extravagance to wage psychological warfare. This is a story that rarely reaches Western textbooks, overshadowing by the romance of larger battles, yet it speaks to a sophisticated understanding of human perception. General He Qi of the Eastern Wu was a man who understood that power is often a performance. In the early 3rd century, the southern lands of China were wild, inhabited by the Shanua tribes, fierce, independent people who refused to submit to the Han or the Wu warlords. Conventional military subjugation was costly and often failed in the mountainous terrain. He Qi took a different approach. He did not just bring soldiers, he brought theater. He was known for his immense extravagance. He equipped his troops not just with sharp steel, but with armor that gleamed with polished lacquer and gold. His ships were carved with intricate dragons and painted in brilliant vermilions and azures, draped with silks that fluttered in the wind. To a modern Western observer, this might seem like vanity, a waste of resources. But imagine standing on the banks of the Yangtze as a tribal warrior or a soldier of the rival Wei state. You see a fleet approaching that shines like a floating palace. The weapons catch the sun, blinding in their quality. The soldiers look not like conscripts, but like celestial guards. The psychological impact is immediate. A state that can afford to dress its killers in silk and gold must possess resources beyond comprehension. It must be invincible. In the Battle of Dongko against the Wei forces, this shock and awe tactic proved decisive. The Wei commander, Chao Xiu, seeing the sheer grandeur of He Chi's fleet compared to the storm-battered remnants of the other Wu forces, was struck with hesitation. The visual display of wealth and organization sowed doubt in the enemy ranks before a single arrow was fired. He Chi didn't just defeat his enemies, he overawed them into submission, proving that in the East, the appearance of strength can be just as lethal as the strike itself. These three stories, the buried legions of Chongpeng, the river trap of Bokdang, and the gilded fleets of He Chi, weave together a tapestry of Asian warfare that is darker and more complex than simple conquest.